When I walked away from the woman I loved, she betrayed my trust. She tried to win me back, only to face the consequences of her own game. And Sabrina and I first crossed paths at a friend's engagement party in Dallas about 5 years back, and I remember thinking she was the most magnetic person I'd ever met. She had this confidence that filled the room, and I guess my laid-back vibe was refreshing for her, because she latched onto me like I was some novelty. I'm a construction supervisor, the guy who makes sure the luxury homes and fancy commercial buildings actually stand the hell up. And back then, Sabrina couldn't get enough of what I did. She used to trace the calluses on my palms with her fingers and tell me how hot it was that I worked with my hands, how I wasn't like the soft-handed office type she'd dated before. She beamed when she introduced me to people, calling me her builder boyfriend, bragging about how I remodeled her bathroom in a weekend like it was some heroic feat. It felt good to be appreciated for what I brought to the table, not just in terms of my paycheck. Though that wasn't small either, but because I could create something real that you could touch, walk through, live in. We moved in together about a year after we met, got ourselves a decent condo in Austin that I spent months making perfect, new floors, custom cabinets, the works, and I covered most of the bills without complaint. I made more money than Sabrina did, and I was happy to take care of things, whether it was expensive dinners, trips to the coast, or helping pay down the credit card debt she'd dragged from her early 20s. I thought we were solid, that we had mutual respect, that we were partners who balanced each other out. When I proposed to her at a quiet spot overlooking the lake in Hill Country, she cried, said yes, and filled her Instagram with photos of the ring and the view and captions about how lucky she was to have found a man who could build dreams with his hands. But over time, little cracks started forming in the way she looked at me and what I did. When she landed a big promotion at her company, suddenly she started dropping names, talking about quarterly earnings and market strategies, and it was like the work I did became a little less impressive to her with every fancy dinner she had with her team. She didn't say anything outright at first, but it was there in the way she'd brush past me talking about her meetings or in the way she'd change the subject when I mentioned a project I was proud of. It all came to a head one night at a dinner party one of her colleagues threw at their sleek place in Houston. I knew the type of people who'd be there, the kind who think the world ends at the edge of their glass-walled offices, but I went because she wanted me there. From the minute we walked in, I felt like a fish in the wrong damn pond. Everyone was dressed to the nines, sipping expensive wine and throwing around business jargon like it was a contest. Sabrina kept her distance, laughed a little louder than usual at their jokes, and I stood there nursing my drink, trying not to look out of place. I'd stepped into the kitchen to grab another beer when I heard her voice, that tone she used when she was trying too hard to impress. She was with her coworker Eli, some guy who'd just made senior manager, and the host of the party, a woman named Dana. They were asking about me, what I did, and I waited for her to say what she always used to, about how I managed crews and brought in big projects on time and under budget. But instead, she gave this little laugh, one I'd never heard from her before, and said I worked construction, out there in hard hats yelling at guys digging ditches, like that was all there was to it. They laughed, joked about neon vests and blue-collar grit, and I stood there, drink in hand, hearing the woman who once thought my work was sexy now act like I was some embarrassment she had to explain away. I could have called her out, right there in front of them, made a scene, but instead, I walked in, smiled, and slid my arm around her waist like I hadn't heard a thing. When Eli asked what I did, I looked him straight in the eye and said I supervised teams building luxury properties and mentioned the multi-million-dollar project I was finishing downtown. Sabrina's face tightened, but I kept my tone light, acted like it wasn't a big deal, and let them squirm for a moment before changing the subject. That night, as I lay awake beside her, I saw things clearer than I ever had. She didn't see me as a partner anymore. She saw me as the safe bet, the guy who paid the bills and fixed the sink, while she kept an eye out for someone who'd look better in the photos she shared at work. And right then, I started planning my exit, because what she didn't know was that I'd been fielding offers from a national developer looking to bring me on as a senior director, a job that paid 3 times what I was making and would move me to Phoenix to oversee projects up and down the West Coast. I hadn't told her because I thought I'd surprise her with the good news, but after hearing her that night, I knew she didn't deserve to be part of it. She'd already made her choice without realizing it, and soon, I'd make mine. The morning after that party, I woke up early, brewed some coffee, and sat in silence, staring out over the city as the sun came up, realizing that everything I thought we had was built on a foundation that was already crumbling beneath me. I replayed every little comment Sabrina had made over the past year, the way she'd started pushing me to attend networking events, handing me business books with highlighted sections, urging me to think about my career path, like I was some project she was managing at work. I remembered all the times she'd talked up her boss Lucas, telling me how sharp he was, how much I could learn from him if only I'd listen. It was like she was slowly trying to mold me into someone who'd fit into the polished world she'd started chasing so hard. I didn't argue or fight her on it because I knew none of it was really about helping me. It was about making me look better standing next to her in front of her colleagues. That realization burned, but it also made everything clearer. If she thought I lacked ambition, I'd let her believe that right up until the day I left. That next week, I started quietly untangling my life from hers, opening a new account at a credit union across town, moving my savings over bit by bit so it wouldn't raise any red flags. I kept just enough in our shared account to cover the usual bills so she wouldn't notice anything was off. I gave notice to our landlord, letting him know I might not be around after the lease was up and asking him to keep that between us. I started packing away the things that mattered: my tools, important papers, my grandfather's watch, things she'd never noticed missing until it was too late. Meanwhile, Sabrina kept dropping hints about how I should be grateful for her guidance. One night over dinner, she mentioned Eli's new car, saying how he'd earned it because he thought about the big picture and took the right steps to move up. She'd grin at me like I should be taking notes, like I should thank her for pointing it out. Another time, she told me about a friend's husband who'd transitioned from a trade to some desk job at a tech firm, saying how proud his wife was of him. I just nodded, played along, let her think she was shaping me into the man she wanted. The more I watched her, the more obvious it became that she didn't want me, not really. She wanted the version of me she thought she could show off. The final straw came late one night when I came back inside to grab my wallet and heard her on a video call with Dana and a few other work friends, her voice low but clear enough. She was laughing about how she was refining me, how I was like a fixer-upper she was bringing up to standard, like I was some project house she'd flipped and planned to sell when the time was right. They all laughed and told her how impressive it was that she'd gotten me to read career books and dress better. And when someone teased her about Eli, about how obvious it was that he liked her, she didn't deny it. Not really. She laughed and said it wasn't like that. But there was that tone in her voice, that fake protest that begged them to keep pushing. When someone brought up the leadership conference Eli had offered to take her to in his place, a trip that meant 3 days away together, she acted like it was just a kind gesture, but I could see through it. I stood there frozen for a moment, then turned and walked out without saying a word, knowing right then that she wasn't just embarrassed by me, she was already lining up the next chapter without me in it. From that night on, everything I did was about preparing my exit. Every conversation, every smile, every nod was part of the act. I kept playing the eager student, kept letting her think she was helping me grow. I took mental notes while she talked about her plans for our future, about the kind of home we'd buy someday, about the trips we'd take, all while knowing that none of it would happen, not with her. I booked my one-way ticket, confirmed my start date, arranged for temporary housing in Phoenix, and packed the last of my personal things at Jordan's place, each step bringing me closer to freedom while she stayed completely oblivious. I even went to one of those dinners with her work friends, let Eli give me advice like he was some mentor, smiled and nodded while he talked about the importance of always thinking 2 steps ahead. How guys in the trades often limited themselves because they focused too much on the work and not enough on the ladder. I asked questions, pretended to jot notes, let them think they were inspiring me, all while knowing I was days away from walking away from all of it. Sabrina beamed at me across the table like she was proud of how far she thought she'd brought me, and I let her have it, let her believe she was finally molding me into something worthy of her circle. Inside, I was counting down the hours until I'd be gone, until I'd leave all of it behind. The final stretch before my departure felt like I was performing in a play where I already knew the ending, while the rest of the cast stayed blissfully unaware of what was coming their way. And each day I woke up feeling like I was a step closer to reclaiming my self-respect after so many months of being treated like some side character in Sabrina's carefully staged life. I kept up the act, playing the role of the eager student, the man supposedly inspired by her endless stream of advice, pretending to absorb every word she repeated from Eli, nodding at his so-called wisdom about career ladders, corporate branding, and personal growth, all the while knowing I was about to step into a future that didn't include a single one of them. I watched Sabrina glow with pride every time I pretended to take her suggestions to heart, her face lighting up as if she truly believed she had molded me into something worth showing off. As if she thought she had finally transformed me from the man she met into the man she wanted to parade in front of her colleagues. Meanwhile, I was tightening every last detail of my plan, making sure there would be no loose threads, no way for her to pull me back once I was gone, setting up my relocation paperwork, signing my new contract, securing the housing provided in Phoenix, and finalizing the shift of my savings so that the shared account we had would barely contain enough to pay for the next utility bill before it ran dry. I changed the payment methods for the subscriptions she clung to without a second thought, setting them to cards that were due to expire conveniently just days after I'd be long gone, so that when the inevitable happened and her shows stopped streaming, she'd finally understand what it felt like to be left out in the cold. I packed up the last of my tools, my keepsakes, my documents, every piece of my life that meant something to me, quietly moving them to Jordan's garage in small loads so she wouldn't notice, and each time I left the apartment with a duffel bag. I smiled inside knowing I was one step closer to freedom. What really solidified my decision beyond all doubt was hearing her one night when she thought I was out at the gym, sitting on another video call with Dana and her circle of cliquey office friends, sipping wine and bragging about how she had finally gotten me to see the light, how she'd taken this so-called rough draft of a man and was sculpting him into something respectable, someone who could finally match her ambition. And when they teased her about Eli, about how obvious it was that he was angling for more than just coffee meetings and project advice, she didn't deny it. Not really. Not in a way that meant anything. Because the laugh in her voice and the way she brushed off their comments told me everything I needed to know about where her head really was. I stood outside that window, listening to the woman I'd planned a future with reduce me to a fixer-upper project, while secretly lining up her next opportunity in Eli. And in that moment, every trace of doubt I might have had evaporated, replaced by cold, clear purpose. I spent the next few days executing my plan with precision, confirming with my employer that my move-in date was secure, that my office would be waiting, that my team would be in place, all while Sabrina chattered about wedding dates, venues, and guest lists as if she hadn't already betrayed everything our relationship was supposed to stand for. She talked about Eli constantly, about his insight, his advice, his brilliance, as if she was trying to will me into becoming him, blind to the fact that I was counting down the minutes until I'd never hear his name again. When she suggested we invite him over for dinner so he could mentor me further, I almost laughed, but instead, I played my part perfectly, agreeing easily, keeping my tone light, telling her whatever she wanted to hear, because at that point, I was beyond caring about her schemes or her illusions. The night before I left, I took her to that overpriced restaurant she loved so much, ordered the wine she always claimed was her favorite, and toasted to our future with a smile that she believed was genuine, all while feeling nothing but the satisfaction of knowing that by the time she realized what had happened, I'd be 1,000 miles away, starting a life that had nothing to do with her or the shallow world she'd tried to pull me into. I watched her post pictures of our meal, filter them, caption them with empty phrases about love and partnership, completely unaware that the man sitting across from her was already gone in every way that mattered. When the morning came, I left before dawn, my truck packed, my letter of resignation delivered, my ticket to Phoenix ready, and I didn't look back even once as I drove away from that chapter of my life, focused only on what waited ahead. By the time the sun had risen fully over the horizon, I was miles down the highway, my truck packed tight with the last of my belongings, my phone already buzzing with the first wave of calls and texts that I had no intention of answering. I imagined Sabrina waking up, stretching, reaching for me, only to find an empty space where I'd been, and I pictured the moment she spotted the engagement ring on the dresser, the note I'd left behind, the silence filling the apartment like a thunderclap she never saw coming. The messages started out confused, concerned even, asking where I was, whether everything was okay. But as the hours passed without a single response from me, the tone shifted and the desperation bled through every word she sent. I sat at the airport, sipping bad coffee, watching the flood of missed calls grow, letting the reality sink in that I was finally free from the web she'd spun around us, that I had escaped before she could ever realize what she'd truly lost. When I landed for my connection and turned my phone back on, the onslaught continued, the number of unread messages doubling, the missed calls climbing, and even Sabrina's mother had joined the chorus, leaving voicemails begging me to call, to explain, to come back and fix what had been broken. I didn't listen to more than a few seconds of any of them because I already knew what they'd say, knew they were too little, too late, empty words meant to soothe Sabrina's panic more than they were meant for me. I texted Jordan to let him know I'd made it as far as my layover, and he replied instantly, telling me that Sabrina had already shown up at his place looking for me, crying, demanding answers, that her father had called him and threatened to come find me, as if I was some runaway kid instead of a grown man making the only choice left that made sense. Jordan said he told him the truth, that I was gone because I wanted to be, because no one gets to control another person's life like that forever without consequences. The days that followed were exactly what I expected, a whirlwind of chaos that I watched from a distance, disconnected from it in every way that mattered. Jordan kept me updated, sending screenshots of Sabrina's frantic posts on social media, painting herself as the abandoned fiancé, the heartbroken victim blindsided by the man she loved, conveniently leaving out the part where she'd spent months tearing me down behind my back, mocking my work, and lining up Eli as her backup plan. Her friends shared her posts, offered sympathy, called me names, while I settled into my new apartment, walked through my new office, met with my new team, and started building a future that had nothing to do with the wreckage I'd left behind. Each update from Jordan felt like another confirmation that I'd made the right move, as he told me about the subscriptions cutting off one by one, how she ranted about losing her shows, how she tried to access accounts she never paid for and acted shocked when she couldn't. When she finally managed to get me on the phone after days of me ignoring everything, I answered because I wanted her to hear it directly from me, to know that I wasn't running scared or hiding, that I had chosen to walk away because she showed me exactly who she was. She started with tears, with gasps, asking where I was, why I'd done this, how I could leave without a word, and I let her get it all out before I said anything. When I spoke, I kept my voice calm, steady, told her I heard everything at that dinner, that I knew how she truly saw me, how she described me to her friends, how she reduced my career to a joke so she could impress people who didn't give a damn about either of us. She tried to deny it at first, to claim it was a joke, that I misunderstood, but I cut her off, told her that respect doesn't sound like that no one talks about someone they love the way she had, that I wasn't interested in pretending anymore. I told her about my new job, my new city, my new life, and I let her sit with that knowledge. Let it hit her that while she was busy trying to change me, I was already becoming more than she ever believed I could be. She begged me to reconsider, said we could work through it, asked me to come home so we could talk, but I told her there was nothing left to say, that she showed me who she really was, and I finally believed it, that she should start thinking about where she was going to live because the lease was up soon and I wouldn't be part of that decision anymore. I hung up before she could say anything else, blocked her number, and felt the last weight lift off my shoulders as I stepped out onto my balcony and looked out over the city that was mine now, a place where I could finally breathe without feeling like I had to explain myself to anyone. Jordan kept the updates coming over the next week, telling me how Sabrina was falling apart, how Eli had started keeping his distance now that the drama was public, how she'd been removed from a major work project because she couldn't focus, how her parents had to help move her out because she couldn't afford the place alone. Each message was like another piece of proof that I'd made the right decision, that sometimes the cleanest break is the one that hurts the most in the moment but heals the fastest in the long run, and I didn't waste a single minute looking back. The months that followed felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years, like I had finally stepped out of a cage I hadn't even realized I'd been living in until the door slammed shut behind me. Every morning I woke up and my new apartment felt lighter. Every drive to my new office felt like a reminder that I'd chosen myself for once. And with every decision I made on my own terms, I felt the weight of those years with Sabrina fall further behind me. The job wasn't just a title or a paycheck. It was a chance to build something that mattered, to lead teams that respected me, to put my name on projects that would reshape parts of the city skyline. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't have to explain or defend what I did, didn't have to measure my worth against anyone else's expectations. I didn't waste time thinking about Sabrina because, in my mind, she was part of a life I had outgrown, a chapter that had ended the moment I left her standing in the ruins of the plans she'd built on my back. But just when I was sure that chapter was closed for good, just when I had settled into my new rhythm and stopped expecting to hear her voice in my head every time I made a choice, I got a message I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't from her, but from her mother, a polite, carefully worded email that tried to hide the desperation beneath the surface. She wrote about how Sabrina had been struggling, how losing me had been a wake-up call, how she had grown and changed in the months since I left, and how it would mean the world if I could just speak with her, hear her out. Maybe give her a chance to say what she hadn't said when she had the chance. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing it without replying, because I had nothing left to say, and I didn't owe her or her family anything more than the silence I'd already given them. But as life often does, it had one last unexpected twist waiting for me, one last moment designed to remind me of how far I'd come and how far they hadn't. It happened at a major industry event, one where my company was unveiling a transformative redevelopment project that would change the entire face of a downtown district, a project I'd helped design and now led as part of my new role. I was standing with my team, going over the final rollout plan before we stepped onto the stage to present to the assembled investors, city officials, and executives when I saw her across the room. There was no mistaking her, even though it had been months, even though she wore the polished mask she always put on in public, and standing beside her, looking just as polished, just as eager to impress, was Eli. At first, she didn't see me, too busy working the room, too focused on making sure everyone saw what she wanted them to see. But when our eyes finally met, I watched the mask slip for just a heartbeat, saw the flicker of shock that she tried to cover with that same familiar smile she always used when she needed something from me. I watched as she tried to decide how to approach, how to spin whatever story she'd been telling herself about what had happened, and I could almost hear the gears turning as she walked toward me, Eli in tow. Neither of them fully understanding the position they had just stumbled into. Eli looked like he'd swallowed his tongue the second he realized who I was in that room, the man leading the very company that now controlled the fate of the project his division depended on. And I knew in that moment that whatever power they thought they had built had just crumbled beneath their feet. Sabrina opened with small talk, asked how I'd been, said how glad she was to see me thriving, tried to drop hints about how she'd always believed in my potential, as if she could rewrite the past with a few flattering words and a well-practiced smile. I kept my responses polite but detached, gave her nothing to cling to, no opening to pull me into whatever narrative she was hoping to craft. Eli barely spoke, probably realizing that no amount of charm could fix the dynamic they had walked into, probably realizing that the man they had both underestimated was now the one with the final say. When I turned the conversation to business, outlined how our teams would be working together, and offered Eli a high-visibility role in a region so undesirable no one had taken it for years, I did it with a sincerity that left no doubt I knew exactly what I was doing. Later, as I stepped outside to catch my breath in the cool night air, I felt something unexpected, not the satisfaction of revenge or the thrill of having the upper hand, but a deep, steady peace. The kind that comes from knowing you had chosen yourself when it mattered most, and that no one could take that away. I thought about the man I'd been a year earlier, lying awake beside someone who couldn't see my worth, questioning every decision, trying to measure up to standards I didn't believe in, and I realized how far I had come. The real victory wasn't in seeing her regret or in watching Eli squirm. It was in knowing I had walked away, built a life on my own terms, and left them both exactly where they had chosen to stand. The next day, I received one last message from Sabrina, a short, cautious email that thanked me for being gracious at the event, that hinted at old times and possibilities without saying the words outright. That left the door cracked just enough to see if I might respond. I didn't. I let it sit, unread, unacknowledged, because there was nothing left for me in that chapter, no reason to look back at a door I had closed so completely. And as I stood that evening on my balcony, watching the sun sink behind the buildings I now helped shape, I realized that sometimes the best kind of ending is the quiet one, the one where you simply move on so far that the past can't touch you anymore, and where the only thing left to say is nothing at all.